He will be a staff for the righteous with which for them to stand and not to fall. And he will be the light of the nations and the hope of those whose hearts are troubled. All who dwell on the earth will fall down and worship him, and they will praise and bless and celebrate with song the Lord of spirits. 1 Enoch chapter 48, verses 4 through 5. The modern world doesn't acknowledge, but is nevertheless haunted by spirits, angels, demons, and saints. In our time, many yearn to break free of the prison of a flat, secular materialism, to see and to know reality as it truly is. What is this spiritual reality like? How do we engage with it well? How do we permeate everyday life with spiritual presence? Orthodox Christian priests Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung host this live call-in show focused on enchantment in creation, the union of the seen and unseen as made by God and experienced by mankind throughout history. Welcome to the Lord of Spirits.
Well, good evening, giant killers and dragon slayers. See, that's to let all the people at home know that this is really live. You are listening to Lord of Spirits podcast. My co-host, Father Stephen DeYoung, is with me from Ligonier, Pennsylvania.
I think we're in Bolivar, technically.
And I'm Father Andrew Stephen Damick in Bolivar, Pennsylvania, because I think the line runs right here, actually. And that's because we are here at the Lord of Spirits conference with live human beings. You can hear them breathing in the microphones right now.
Now, hold on just a second. I want to peel back the curtain.
Oh. Ooh.
You guys are all right here. Father Andrew scripts this stuff out. Including, so like here's his intro, and then he has, in italics, riotous response.
I'm an old theater guy. It's like having the big laugh and clap sign, you know. Exactly.
Now you know why I'm always interrupting him at the beginning of the show, is just to throw him off his game before we even get started.
Lord of Spirits is taped before a live studio audience. So Mike, not exactly our biggest fan, DeGan, will not be taking your calls tonight. He's not even here, even though his job literally depends on it. Instead, there are some 180, 185, 200 pairs of eyes staring at us right now. Do you feel? You never feel self-conscious, though.
I feel seen.
I feel seen. So, but at least 95% of you are sadly disappointed at how unpulchritudinous we have both turned out to be. The other 5% are probably face-blind anyway and will sumptuously feast on the dulcet tones of our vocal stylings as per usual. So, as I said, we are recording live at the Lord of Spirits conference. This episode is going to air for everyone else on October 23rd. So, this is our Halloween episode. As such, we have some introductory bits to share. Before I share my introductory bit, and this is not in the script, I studied up.
Uncharted territory, people.
That's right. I had to point out, and I actually told the staff, the Ancient Faith staff, that I was going to do this, and people were like, and they were asking me what it could possibly be that I was going to mention, so no one knows. Today is the 259th anniversary. So someone's doing math in their head. 1766. The 259th anniversary, and I'm not kidding about this, of the Nottingham Cheese Riot. It is. Who knew about the Nottingham Cheese Riot? You! Amazing. I feel like there should be a prize for her. The Nottingham Cheese Riot is real. It is not a joke. It's not a joke. So there were... Today is this amazing anniversary. I had to point this out. Last time it was Bat Week. It was literally Bat Week the last time we did this conference. So the Nottingham Cheese Riot, there were food shortages going on in England at the time. And so there was a problem where particular areas that produced a lot of one thing, that merchants would come and buy it all up and then sell it at inflated prices elsewhere. And Nottingham made cheese. That's right. And so these Lincolnshire merchants, we all know about Lincolnshire merchants. They came to buy this cheese and take it somewhere else. And so riots began to try to prevent them from doing that. And so all the Nottingham people, Nottinghamers, I don't know. All the Nottinghamians went into the various storehouses and stuff and brought out these enormous wheels of cheese, and to protest, they rolled them through the streets. I'm not kidding. And the mayor of the town, in an attempt to stop this, got out there with his local constabulary. And you know why he failed? Why he was not able to do it and they had to bring in the military? Because he got knocked down by a wheel of cheese. Actually true. So whatever.
Sheriff of Nottingham had it coming.
That's right.
I'll give it to understand.
So whenever October 2nd rolls around. That was completely off the cuff, actually. It is also called the Great Cheese Riots. No joke. You can look this up on the Wikipedias. It's true. The Nottingham Cheese Riot. So, yes, 259 years ago today. Did that satisfy you ancient faith staffers? Was that a pretty good factoid? Yes? Okay, all right. A couple thumbs up in the back. But since it is our Halloween episode, I actually wanted to talk. I had a question to ask you, which is, what do ventriloquists have to do with necromancers? The answer is wizards. So the Hebrew word, and I know I'm going to mispronounce this because Ben Jonson wrote of William Shakespeare that he had small Latin and less Greek. I have small Greek, less Latin, and even less Hebrew. But the Hebrew word for wizards is something like Yideoni. Is that pretty close? He's going to look it up.
No, I'm going to look at your
You're going to look at my note.
transliterations. You even did that right.
Yideoni, wizards. This word shows up in the Bible a bunch of times. And if you've got the King James. And it means something like all or very knowing ones, And so it actually is parallel. I don't have the theme music with the English word wizard, whose etymology means wise person. It doesn't mean magic user. It means a wise person. And what's interesting, though, is that this Hebrew word, Yideoni, always appears in parallel with the word ob, which means a ghost or an ancestral spirit. And sometimes this gets translated as a soothsaying spirit or a familiar spirit. So the early uses of this Yideoni word, which gets translated sometimes as wizard, it seems to be that they were epithets of the dead ancestors. So your Ob could also be called Yideoni. And the reason is there was this idea that they had this sort of occult knowledge, right? That the dead have knowledge that the living don't have. This is a thing. Eventually, though, this term Yideoni gets referred to humans who actually are consulting the dead on behalf of the living, right? So this shows up in the Bible. One of them is the Witch of Endor. That Saul goes to, right? She brings Samuel up out of the grave. And so this term, which originally was a kind of demonic necromantic term, comes to kind of be used to refer to humans who have become deeply involved in this demonic activity of consulting the dead and trying to get information from the dead. It often gets translated, this Yideoni gets translated most of the time in most modern translations of the Bible as spiritists. So you'll see that probably in most Bibles that you have. But if you love the King James Version of the Bible, as I do deeply, it's wizards in the King James. The Septuagint, which we know there's no such thing, right? See who the real listeners of the podcast are. Not very many giggles on that one. Yeah. Anyways, the Greek Old Testament usually translates the word ob, this sort of ancestral spirit, with engastrithimithos, which literally means speaking from the belly, but gets translated in a lot of translations, that Greek word gets translated as ventriloquist. And so often you can see in some literature the word gastromyth, which is also the name of my next band. And it's related to the Pythonis of the Delphic oracle. And of course, the Delphic oracle, the oracle, the woman who's there speaking the oracles on behalf of Apollo, she's called this Python, because of this mythical snake that Apollo supposedly slew right nearby Delphi. The Greek Old Testament often translates Yideoni as epaidos, which means conjurer. And so then this kind of collection of words is used in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and various other places in the Old Testament to kind of indicate this is a kind of person that you're not supposed to have anything to do with. And often it's indicated that if someone is like this, that they should be stoned, right? So now you know if someone says, what do ventriloquists have to do with necromancers? The answer is wizards.
It's a question I face every day too.
I mean, it's true. I feel like next time Deacon Sarah from Roland is having some kind of weird, you have to answer a riddle in one of your role-playing games. Yeah.
Oh, I thought he showed you his doll. It's creepy.
Yeah. That this should be the kind of question that should be answered, to answer a riddle to get through some door in one of your role-playing games. Oh, come on. You're fired. So that's my contribution to our spooky Halloween episode. Father Stephen told me that he was going to talk about AI. Is that right?
I am.
The city of AI or
no. No, it was leveled a long time ago, so not a lot has happened there recently.
AI has
no
leveled with us.
No trick-or-treating whatsoever. So I know. I was going to say, well, we could subtitle this little section, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love AI, but I don't love AI, so I kind of hate it. But I'm not worried about it. So take that, Pajot. Shots fired. Also, I wrote nothing down.
Of course.
There's a story about how I learned that lesson. Mom knows. But she probably won't tell anybody. It's embarrassing for her.
Because she's a good mom.
But yeah, so people get real worried about AI, right? They think it's a demon or a monster. I like Sam Harris's way of expressing why he's so worried about AI, because it's literally, well, what if we make an AI and we tell it to make paper clips? And it decides to just turn everything into paper clips, including us. Like, literally, that's the example he uses. And I'm like, it seems like we could avert that at some point between making paper clips and it comes for you.
Isn't he supposed to be like one of the most brilliant atheists of our time or something like this?
Some people have said so. I think he's Susan Harris's fail son, personally. Shots fired, Sam Harris. Anyway. But yeah, they're worried about it for all kinds of reasons, and I think people shouldn't be, because I think the concern people have comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what consciousness is and how it works. So I'm going to be building off of a little bit of a thing that we've talked about on the show a few times with consciousness. So we've talked about on the show how anything that is an organized system that transfers information, and that's with like the broad physics definition of both of those terms, has some, and we've used the term in the past, level of consciousness. I'm going to problematize that term a little bit. I don't just do this to other people, I do this to myself.
Wow, very postmodern, using the word problematize.
Yes, I don't just go after other people's use of language, I go after my own from time to time, because I started thinking more about this whole idea of level of consciousness and like, what does that mean? And I think even that plays into a little bit of the confusion that leads to people being scared of AI. Because, for example, obviously, as we've talked about on the show, you don't know what it's like to be a bat, right? You don't know what it's like to be another thing, right? All we're saying when there's some consciousness there is that it's like something, right? It's like something to be whatever that is. So we could say, well, yeah, it's like something to be an anemone. It's like something to be a dog, right? And we look at that, we say, well, pretty clearly those are different things. But we also then start talking about level. Well, like the anemone would be at like a lower level than the dog of consciousness. But what do we actually mean by that? Like the dog's smarter? I think that's kind of what we mean. The dog is smarter, more interactive, right? And that's a confusion of consciousness and intelligence. which is a very basic problem.
There was a lot of hmms in the audience when you said that.
So
You don't get this when we do a regular podcast. There's no in the earphones.
Right. And so
Simon, you can say once in a while into the earphones, okay?
I think people will just post in the YouTube comments.
Oh, okay. No, usually they're posting stuff that has nothing to do.
Oh. Well, yeah, we always
talking about.
We always get the cultist who shows up and it's like Moses is returning from the grave.
I love those
in
people.
3
though.
weeks.
I love those guys. And
to
if
wreak
that's
vengeance.
you, and if that's one of you, thank you so much for coming to the Lord of Spirits podcast.
I'm kind of hoping it's unironic, though. I'm kind of hoping
yeah.
it's a legit crazy person.
You haven't never told them about the email we got from the guy who was convinced. I mean, he sent us pages of stuff, convinced that his wife had been replaced by a reptilian.
No, it was a mantis.
Excuse me.
It was insectoid.
And I was so concerned after
That's
reading
why it was
this.
so ridiculous. I mean, the reptilian, sure. But
I was so concerned after reading this that there's one Orthodox church in that town that this guy was from. I was actually seriously considering calling up the priest and just be like, Father, they walk among you. You just need to know that they're out there.
They need help.
In Nebraska.
Somewhere.
You were saying, sorry.
Yes. So that confusion between consciousness and intelligence is, I think, part of the fear. Right? We make a machine smart enough, and then somehow by being smart to a certain degree, having a certain amount of processing power, it's going to become self-aware and decide to kill everyone, like Skynet or HAL, or right? Like that's what we're thinking.
You know, Skynet became conscious on my 22nd birthday.
Well, there you go.
Everyone's now like working back when my
And
birthday
we're all
must
still
be.
there.
And we're all still here. It was 1997.
Yeah.
Was when Skynet became conscious. In the immortal words of Elton John, I'm still standing.
So like Skynet became conscious. St. John the Forerunner was beheaded, and you were born.
That's right. And on the day that I was born,
I'm not going to say if there's anything connecting those ideas.
Oh well, I could connect it
terms
even
of
more. Because someone died that was related to this recently. On the day that I was born, within 3.5 weeks, 2 different women tried to kill the President of the United States. One of them was Sarah Jane Moore, who just died. She just died. She's like in her 90s. And the other one was Lynette Squeaky Fromme of the Manson family. So if you guys, all you conspiracy thinking people out there, like, wow, all the dots are connecting now. It's true. It's also the only year that the President of the United States ever stood up at the State of the Union address. This is the year we were both born in. Ever stood up in the State of the Union address and said, you know, ladies and gentlemen of Congress, members of the Supreme Court, whatever, the State of the Union is not good. Every other year they say it's strong, it's powerful, blah, blah, blah. But good old Gerald Ford, the guy elected neither president nor vice president.
Yes.
He was our president.
He was from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
That's right.
So he absorbed the Dutch bluntness.
That's right.
Like, I got to be real with you folks.
That's right.
Things aren't good out there.
That's right. That's right. I'm telling you guys, 1975 was a mystical year. Something about it. Any other 75ers in the room? How's turning 50 treating you?
Next Wednesday, I will be visiting.
Next Wednesday, everybody. All right. I should say, though, that the aforementioned Pajot is also a 75er. Yes. What is that all about? He is the world's second greatest Canadian.
I don't boo the man. What was that?
He's the second greatest
Wow.
Canadian.
Oh, okay.
it was a ooh,
Oh.
So, ooh.
So interjections aside,
Sorry.
yeah, no. Right. So yeah, so we think like you get intelligent, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're going to become somehow conscious in a different way, right? Than it already is. But even ascribing levels of consciousness to different intelligence is assuming some things, right? It's kind of assuming we know what it's like to be an anemone and what it's like to be a dog, and that to be a dog is somehow a better experience. Being an anemone may be fabulous, right? It could be like a completely blissful existence.
But they're not telling.
Exactly.
Well, they're not telling us.
We have no way of knowing. It could also be abject screaming horror every moment. Pity the anemone. Who knows? But
It's the name of my next album, actually.
so we don't have the ability to do comparatives. But the more important thing for AI is, right, if we're right about what has consciousness, then the systems on which AI runs are already conscious in some way.
He did promise he was going to make everybody more worried and less worried at the same time.
But the AI itself is software, not hardware.
That's some more hmms.
Yes, it is
Not as
software.
many.
Now I'm going to do a poll. Who here has read Grant Morrison's Animal Man?
Your favorite deacon.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I'm going to expand this a little more. John Burns' She-Hulk? Anybody? A Deadpool comic. Seen a Deadpool movie. Okay, people don't read. That's what I just learned.
Shame.
People don't read, even
Shame.
comics. Okay. So,
Wow.
so these are all examples of fiction where, right, characters are sort of self-aware that they're a character in a comic book or a movie, right, or become aware of that fact. Okay? So a book or a movie we could view as the hardware, the delivery system. The software is the actual content. Okay. I can write a book or a comic book or a movie script. I can create characters, if I'm a skilled writer, who seem very real, who seem like real people, who seem like you could say, well, I know this character has never been in this situation in any of the books, but here's what I think they would do in situation X, Y, Z, right? Because they're so, and the reality is they wouldn't do anything, and that's it, because they don't exist, right? But we think, right? We conjure that up. But let me submit to you that no matter how good of a writer I am, no matter how well I did it, how real I made the character seem, that character would never actually become aware that they were a character in a book. I could write them that way. I could simulate it. But they wouldn't actually become self-aware, right? So that can't happen. Bad news, I know. Skynet and HAL can't happen. Right? That's not how this works.
That's for the Gen Xers out there.
Yeah. You know. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Right? Because it just, that doesn't click over. Right, in terms of self-awareness. And this is what we now call AI has been around a long time. When I first got into computers, way back in the day of yore, when they invented it after I got rid of my abacus and, right, moved on, right, there were these things called ELIZA programs.
Oh, yes. Who remembers Eliza?
Which was basically just, they coded a thing so it would do active listening, which is a psychotherapy skill. So it would start out, it would ask you, how are you feeling? And you would say, I am feeling sad. And it would say, why are you feeling sad? And you'd say, well, because this happened. And why does that make you sad? Right? Or it would pick up a word you said. You know, I just visited my mother. Oh, did you enjoy visiting your, right? It would just keep reflecting back to you, right? And they've just made it more and more sophisticated as simulation of a person. And it will probably continue to get more and more realistic as a person. But it will never be a person. It will never come and try to fold you into a paperclip. So you're fine. Although if we do ever make a robot that makes things into paperclips, I want to send it to Sam Harris's house just to see the look on his face.
Nice. Well, this is actually an all Q&A episode of the
Well,
Westminster
mostly,
podcast.
'cause
Mostly.
that technically
yeah, mostly,
wasn't,
yeah.
but-
Mostly.
Yeah.
So we have 2 microphones, right? 2 microphones, both here up at the front. If you would like to get your question answered, don't raise your hand. That's not what we're doing, because your voice needs to be on the recording. If you would like to ask a question, step into the aisles now, these 2 aisles that are right in the middle, and line up, and we will simply go back and forth. And this episode actually, and you all will know this, you can spread this to the rest of the internet, this is only going to have 2 halves here, but the third
Seriously.
third half,
This is his doing.
the third half, see, I wanted to say the third half will be the rest of this conference. But Father Stephen said the third half is the friends we made along the way. So, anyway, So we are going to do two halves. We'll have one break, and then we'll come back.
Maybe
and,
when everyone else leaves, I'll hang around and do a third half.
Oh, there
off
you go.
the
Like
books.
it's just like Father Stephen's Twitch stream. Who tunes into Father Stephen's Twitch stream? That is a surprising number of people.
Why haven't you read Grant Morrison's Animal Man?
Clearly, oh, that's right. Okay, well, we will begin over here on the right. So step up, say your name, and then generally where you're from. And Earth is not the category you want to say you're from.
Hello, my name is Mark, and I'm from New Hampshire,
All right.
and it's really cool to be here. It's really great to be here.
It is cool for you to be here.
It's cool for me. It was 92 degrees in Louisiana when I left.
It shows how cool. It shows how cool you are, that you are here.
So I wanted to know if you can talk a little bit more about, so the Lord of Spirits Goes to Hell episode.
Yes, one of my favorites ever.
I always think of Spinal Tap whenever I hear that. For whatever reason, I don't know. But, so, you talked in that episode, I think Father Stephen, you spoke about how that is Exhibit A for proving the validity of the Orthodox tradition. And if I remember correctly, you used so to lift up your heads, O gates, verse in Psalm, the piece of scripture in Psalm, how that was, for ages the church just sort of spoke that this is about the harrowing of Hades, but didn't have anything to connect it. But then, so some texts were found that proved that was part of the Baal cycle. So I guess my question is, so I just want you guys to talk more about that subject, but if you would. But my question specifically is, when David wrote that psalm, and when it was read by anyone during that time period, would they have made the connection that this was about the Messiah dying and descending into Hades and grabbing hold of Adam and Eve and pulling them out and rescuing the righteous dead from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is one of my favorite subjects. Number one, I want to point out, for anyone who was listening closely to the last thing that the chanters were singing as you were leaving the church, did anyone listen? Yeah. It was Psalm 24. Yeah. The exact psalm you were just referencing. So was that deliberate, Father Anthony Cook? Where are you?
It was the one we found.
Just you found, I just found it somewhere, yeah. Well, so I think one thing that's worth saying about those last lines from Psalm 24, or 23, I think it is in the Greek. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, be lifted up, ye everlasting gates, and the King of glory shall enter in. So that is definitely associated with the harrowing of hell. I mean, that's very explicitly the case in the Gospel of Nicodemus, also called the Acts of Pontius Pilate. Very, very explicit there. But it is also used. Those lines are also used in the Feast of the Ascension to refer to Christ's ascension at the same time. And I actually had a very experienced chanter say that to me as a sort of correction. And I didn't at the moment realize what I should have said, which there is this, I mean, this is going to sound very snooty, but there is this French phrase, l'esprit d'escalier, which means the spirit of the staircase. And it's when you're walking away from a conversation and the thing occurs to you like, oh, that's the thing I should have said, right? And so I had this experience later on.
You're just trying to get back in good with Pajot. That's what that's all about right there.
That's right. And the thing that I should have said is, I mean, is it in Ephesians where St. Paul talks about him descending into the lower parts of the earth and him ascending, right?
Yeah.
To say he ascended, he must have descended.
He descended, also ascended. So
yeah, that's what I should have said. Is like St. Paul ties those events together, the descent into the underworld and the ascension into heaven. And if you read the Gospel of St. Mark, the 40 days are basically not there, right? He basically, he dies, rises from the dead, and then the next scene is him ascending from from the Mount of Olives, right? There's no time in between with Mark. So Mark, the way he tells the story is he closely associates those events together. So all of that is to say that, there are a lot of stories of divine descents into the underworld in the ancient Near East. There's a lot of them, right? So didn't we talk about Inanna going into the underworld at some point? in the Sumerian myth?
Pretty sure.
Where she goes down, she has to pass through the 9 gates of hell and has to take off various bits of clothing to get in there. And by the end, she's naked, but also in a fetal position, which is exactly the position in which they bury their dead. And she slides in and then dethrones her sister, Ereshkigal. And then she's judged and turned into a slab of meat hanging from the wall, which is what happens in Sumerian courtrooms, apparently. But then you also get, in Greek myth, you've got Orpheus descending into Hades. And one thing that's interesting, if you look at all these infernal descents, is that it always turns out badly, even for gods, except in Christianity. And I don't know that this is what Father meant when he said that this is proof of Christianity. But for me, one of the proofs of the truth of Christianity is that it is the highest story. Right? It is the highest story. It is also, for instance, the highest ethic. There is no other ethic that says, love your enemies. You can't get higher than that. Right? That is the highest possible ethic. Only Christianity says that. That's why, a number of atheist philosophers hated that. They're like, oh, this is weak, right? But it's actually not. So to me, this particular story, for modern people, a story being the highest story does not constitute a logical proof. You couldn't submit that, in a logic class or a courtroom or anything like that. But I think human beings, we know on a very deep level that this reality, that the truth of the gospel, that the God who is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, who made everything, who made you, chose to become man and suffered and died and rescued you from the power of demonic forces so that you could be elevated to be with his heavenly hosts. On a very deep level, when we hear that, we know it's true. We know it's true. And try to imagine for a second living in a world that's dominated by demons and by a pagan religion in which you've never heard that before or anything like it. And then you hear that. It's just stunning to imagine that. And the amazing thing is we have now hit another point in history, I think, where there are so many terrible stories being told that when we tell that one again, when we tell that story, when we actually speak the gospel in a way, maybe some new language, but still the exact same content as always, because there's only the one gospel, that when people hear that, I said that to somebody who was raised Christian, and they're like, well, what is the Orthodox take or whatever on the gospel? And I basically said what I just said, and this person started tearing up. And I think it's because they never heard it actually said that way before. They'd always been told that the gospel was like, how do I get saved, or something like that. But actually, there's this cosmic story that has occurred, and you're being invited into it, the best part, right? So to me, that's proof in a way that kind of makes an end run around our sort of, analytical minds, which I have nothing against the analytical mind, but it's not the only way to know stuff. So that's what I think about that.
So to summarize, girl, you know it's true. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Wow. First Milli Vanilli reference on the podcast, I think. Yeah, that's great.
Or is it a reference to the people behind?
That's true. What is Milli Vanilli really? Is
and
it
also,
those two guys?
Bold move, assuming the originality of the longer ending of Mark.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not the...
Question him further about this.
Yeah.
See if he can back it up. No.
You're the biblical scholar, dude.
I think what I was getting at with the proving validity of tradition, and frankly, until you brought that up, I didn't even remember saying it. But
it's a long podcast.
No, it just things come out of my mouth, and then there's stream of consciousness thing. But what I was getting at was the fact that the material and information we needed to make that connection had been lost for thousands of years. But the Orthodox Church's tradition preserved that connection, right? Such that when it was rediscovered, we could go, oh, that's why those two things are connected, right? And so, relatedly, a better answer to give that kind of obnoxious chanter is,
I think I didn't name his
I mean,
name.
this is all I know about this guy, and
Okay,
he
yeah,
sounds
yeah.
obnoxious, but
He's actually great. And he's not in the room.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay, yeah.
I'd still say it if he was. Is to point out that the reason we also, so you just double down, the reason we also use that psalm for the Feast of the Ascension is that the Feast of the Ascension, right, and a lot of our liturgical hymns surrounding that are referencing the way the Ascension is depicted by the prophet Daniel in the enthronement of the Son of Man, which was a deliberate inversion of the enthroning of Baal in the Baal cycle.
That's right.
So the fact that we use it for Ascension also is actually further evidence of that case, that this is another case where the Old Testament is referencing the Baal cycle, and those connections have been preserved by Orthodox tradition, right? And I think that's an important point also in answering the quasi-valid criticism we sometimes get, where they're like, oh, you're acting like in order to understand the Bible or Christianity, you have to read Ugaritic or something and all this. It's like, no, you can just go to church and hear the hymns, right? And accept this stuff, right? But if you want to look under the hood, right, and see how she runs, right, you can go and find all these things and find out how it all makes sense, you know.
Yeah.
But do you think David knew what he was writing?
So
Do you think?
what David wrote was that at some future point, Yahweh, the God of Israel, was going to, in person, invade Sheol, right, and the palace of its ruler, and free the people held captive there. So,
Thank you. All right. I know who you are, but tell everybody.
My name is Andrew, and I am from Holly Springs, North Carolina.
That's right.
Nobody knows where that's at.
That's right. And,
it's in North Carolina.
It's in North Carolina.
right? And this is my godfather, everybody. So you can blame him, I guess, a little bit, you know.
There's a picture floating around the interweb,
That's right. I had a lot more hair at the time.
and I didn't have a beard at the time.
That's right.
If you look at that picture, you'll understand why I have a beard now. But to get to our question, to my question, it's a two-part. The first part is, what exactly is Plato brain? And number two is, what effect does Plato have on Christianity, either for ill or for good?
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, I would answer, what I'd say to the second part is, read Yaroslav Pelikan's Christianity and Classical Culture. That is an amazing text that really lays out sort of the collision of Christianity with classical thought. And of course, his ultimate conclusion is that it wasn't that, Greek classical thought reshaped Christianity. It's that Christian thinkers basically took Greek categories and terms and used them for their own purposes, is what it came down to being. But yeah, you should definitely read that book. It's really, it's a little difficult, but it's worth it if you're interested in this particular big question. What is Plato brain, Father Stephen DeYoung?
Well, I'll add to that on the second point, Vladimir Lossky's Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church, where he's talking specifically about how the Platonist tradition entered Western theology by way of St. Augustine. And he's doing that sort of in St. Augustine, who is a saint, okay, but was heavily influenced by Plato, such that there is a Platonist period in Western theology when it's taught in schools, right, by the schoolmen themselves. There is you look at Boethius and several others, there's a Platonist period. So Plato brain is the fact that there are certain Platonic categories that our culture has kind of fed us. So we all have a grid, an interpretive grid in our minds through which we interpret the experiences we have. And we didn't like, it's not like we started out a blank slate and then we like chose a grid out of a series of events, right? It's everything around us, our culture, our family, right? Our parents, the school we went to, everything, right? All shapes that in various ways. And we could do things to, over time, and it takes time, reshape it in various ways. And so some of the categories that we've got that help, that we use, that we filter things through, are these Platonic categories. So for example, one of those that we've talked about on the show before is that difference implies opposition. That if two things are different, they must be in some way opposed to each other. Right? And that may not be, I mean, unless you've ever had a political discussion, it may not be immediately obvious to you, right? Like how that works. But one of the most profound places that's a fact, the way we think about things, is how we think about ethics and morality. Right? If something is good, if we say, okay, this is good, then that means anything else, insofar as it is different from that thing, must be to some degree or another evil, sinful, bad, whatever we want to use. And so this causes things like in Roman Catholicism, if virginity and celibacy is good, then married life has to be somehow lesser because it's different than that, right? If we say that poverty is good, then possessions must be bad. Or if we say that wealth is good, then poverty must be bad, right? And so it becomes very hard for us, if we've got those categories working, so we've got a case of Plato brain, right? Then to understand, well, no, marriage is the highest calling and way of life for some people, and celibacy is the highest. And for some people, it's both at different times in their life, right? So this idea that there could be a variety of goods, right, is just something that we're not used to thinking and working in that way. So that's one example, right? There are lots of others, like the Platonic idea of participation, where sort of independent things get money. Plato's categories of being and becoming are like this, that anything that's changing is somehow bad and lesser than something that is unchanging and immobile, right? And if you have the idea that God to be perfect and to be God has to be kind of immobile, you're going to run into trouble with like the divine energies, with the idea that God is active in the world. That's why when you read somebody like Philo of Alexandria, the main reason Philo of Alexandria talks about there being a divine logos is he has this very Platonic version of God where God can't be active in the world. He can't even really be that aware of the world. So there has to be some intermediary thing, right? That is in some sense divine, but then is a little lower than God, and therefore can be interactive in the world. And sometimes you can see in that Platonic period in Christianity, that gets fed into Christianity, and they have Christ, in that Philo's logos position, right? Or they have the divine essence, which is like up here, and then the persons of the Trinity are below somehow. Like it does a lot of weird distortions theologically.
All right. Thank you very much. Back over to the right side. What's your name? Where are you from?
Yes, I'm Jonathan from Virginia.
All right.
So first, I do have a lead on your Mantis emailer.
Oh, no.
Is it you? How did that work out for you? You still have your head. Oh, okay.
I never thought I'd say it. Father Stephen, you missed the pop culture reference. Replacing somebody with Mantis was a plot point in the first season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh. See, I am not a Joss Whedon fan.
Oh!
I didn't like Joss Whedon.
Wow.
I didn't like him before he got canceled.
Wow. I like Firefly. Firefly's good, right?
See, I did like Firefly.
Okay,
I will
okay.
give you Firefly.
All right.
Right? I will give you Firefly. I thought you were going to go for the 90s superhero television show Mantis.
Oh, man.
I leave the comic books to you. I know
Okay.
it's far.
Okay.
Yeah, watch her quick.
Okay.
Yes, so I have a compound question on eternity. So the context for this, I have a Calvinist Baptist friend who is a very firm believer in eternal conscious torment, and I'm trying to talk her down from
I'm sorry.
that. Yes, so from the previous times you discussed eternity, I know a lot of things eternity isn't. It's not a Plato brain stasis, the previous question. It's not an endless succession of moments. I know it is some divine energy that we can participate in now, but one, what divine energy does that mean exactly? What does that look like? And two, how does that reconception of eternity affect our view of eternal condemnation?
Yeah. The first thing I'll add to help give some of this context, I think, one of the most useful things I was ever taught in seminary, and we had the same dogmatics professor, so you probably heard this from Dr. Harry Busalis.
I don't know. Not in my notes.
Not in my notes, that's right. Any other Tikhonites? You went to St. Tikhon's. What, did you have Dr. Harry, Father John? Yeah. So
we should explain. Anytime somebody brought up some weird or vaguely heretical idea in asking him a question, he'd just respond with, I don't know, that's not in my notes.
That's right. Which is very nice of him. We had another professor that sometimes would just simply close his book and then walk out when that happened, which I respected that as well. But one of the things that he mentioned is a kind of distillation of understanding the way that the Church Fathers talk about time is that we currently exist in linear time. It has a beginning and an end, right? That God exists in timelessness. If you could even say he exists in something, it's just a manner of speaking. He's not, there is no time for God or whatever, but we could think of that as his time zone, eternity, his time zone. No beginning, no end, whatever. But then that the angelic powers exist in what is called aeonic time, right? And if you want to continue the sort of the mathematical or geometrical analogy, it has a beginning but no end. So it's like a ray rather than a segment. But it doesn't function as a series of moments in the way that our time zone does. And what's really fascinating about this is actually we talk about aeonic time, if I may say so, all the time in our liturgical services. Oh yeah, the priest says unto ages of ages, which in Greek is istus aeonos ton aeonon, the aeonic time. And so in a sense, it's kind of we will become lifted into this time zone, which is not eternity like God's eternity. It is this angelic experience. So we've talked a lot of times, for instance, on the show about, angelic experiences or moments that we have some consciousness of, that on one level you could say they're happening all at once, but on another level they punctuate certain points in human history because we're experiencing linear time. Like there's one angelic fall, but there's kind of 5-ish angelic falls as well, as we said in the third or fourth episode? Back in 2020, when times were great. And so
we saw everything clearly.
That's right. The rain was gone. So let that one, take that one for a while. Yeah. But I think that the whole eternal conscious torment thing is predicated upon the idea that our experience here and now of this time and what it is like to be us in this time is simply going to be the same, but dark and fiery. I think that's what a lot of people think, that this idea of quote unquote hell, that's not even the right term for it, by the way, because hell is the underworld, hell is Hades, hell is Sheol. But that hell is this, this image of a bunch of demons sitting around poking people in the butt with, tridents, right? I mean, isn't this is I'm trying to think of who that cartoonist was. Gary Larson, yes. This is the Gary Larson hell, which is the one that's in all of our heads. that's what that is. But the problem is that our frame of reference is not the frame of reference of what it means to be in the age to come. It's just not. Number one, we're going to have the resurrection. That's going to change a lot. Number two, the righteous will be, as Christ says, one of my favorite verses, sons of God equal to the angels. So what exactly does that mean? We don't quite know. Even St. Paul says, I don't know. So I think that all that preliminary stuff is really important to say. And we have to get the Hollywood ideas, the Gary Larson ideas of what hell is out of our heads, and frankly try to return to the scriptural language, right? Where you've got images of insanity, you've got images of darkness, you've got images of fire, you've got images of being sort of subhuman. That is what kind of damnation is within that context. The truth is that what your average low church Protestant these days would call eternal conscious torment, that is an imposition onto the Bible. It's not even kind of a plain, basic, bare reading of the Bible, where you get these few images put together, that are included, but they don't actually lock together to create a full-orbed picture of what it means to be damned. Why? Because the whole point of describing what it means to be damned is not so that you understand all the ins and outs of the underworld and damnation and whatever. No, the whole point of describing it at all with this very cursory, very short language is don't go there. The whole point is so that you would live a faithful life, right? Now, for a hardcore Calvinist, I don't know, but I have known Calvinists.
Said Reformed Baptist, so not a real Calvinist.
Yeah. I have known people that are within that kind of theological world that in some cases, in many cases, as you pointed out, Father Stephen, if you accuse a Calvinist of believing some horrible thing, their response often is, yeah, and it's effectively like, yes, of course I believe that terrible thing that you just said that I believe about God, whatever. But many faced with that clarity do sometimes recoil in horror and say there must be some other way. And God willing, they run into the arms of the real God. And not away entirely from any kind of, although maybe that's what they need for a while, is to step away because they're so horrified by who they think God is. But yeah, I think that a lot of the problem with this model is that it assumes human understanding and knowledge that we really just do not have. Like, we don't have it all nailed down, So that's what I would say. There was a lot more to what you asked that I'm sure Father Stephen can jump on.
Well, as someone who has it all nailed down, I've not even begun to nail.
Nailed it. And in that you have nailed it.
Yeah. So, Father Andrew's analogy breaks down at certain points.
Of course,
right?
As all analogies do.
Yeah, so he talked about us joining Aeonic time, but the way theosis works, we don't exactly become what angels are. And as I've said on the show before, strictly speaking, time and space don't exist. They're categories that are part of that grid that we filter our experience of reality through in our finitude. And so those are categories that fundamentally don't apply to God. And if you want to read some about that, now Saint Dumitru Staniloy talks about how all of God's attributes are super essential, meaning God's omnipresence doesn't mean that he's everywhere. The way I'm one place, but he's all the places, right? That it means that spatial categories don't apply to God, right? And the same thing is true of eternity, right? That temporal categories don't apply to God, strictly speaking. Now, in human speech, sometimes we have to talk that way. And sometimes even God talks that way to us because of our finitude, right? So we can try and have some kind of understanding, right? But even when we push God's words to us very hard, it gets weird, right? Like God was indwelling the temple in Jerusalem in 850 BC. Wasn't he indwelling everywhere in 850 BC? Well, okay, but he was especially there, right? And like, what does that actually mean? Well, we don't know, right? But God speaks to us in that way to give us a certain understanding. Hey, if you want to go meet with God, that's the place to go, right? Not denying that he's everywhere else too, but right? So we see our guide to what our life will be like in the resurrection is Christ after his resurrection. And you could very clearly see in those narratives that categories of time and space don't really apply to him. Right? That he doesn't have to traverse the distance between two places to get from one place to another. That sometimes it kind of looks like he's two places at once. Right? So, and it doesn't take him time to get from place to place. So we could generally say things like that about our state in eternity. And then beyond that, if you want to know what I think that makes the life of the resurrection look like, there's a Pajot Fest video waiting on YouTube for you.
There you go, that's right.
With a special guest appearance by Jordan Robinette Peterson.
Is that really his middle name?
No.
Oh, okay.
I think it's Jordan Hussein Peterson. So,
I would also add, the other thing I would also add, which occurred to me as you were saying this, St. John of Damascus is on the Orthodox faith, or the exact exposition of the Orthodox faith. If you read the first maybe 12 chapters of that, which in there, I mean, a chapter is like a page, or, I mean, unless it's chapter 8, which goes on for like 8 pages. There's a lot that's good in there about, from almost every single possible angle, about what it is that God, the cataphatic and apophatic things we say about God, the things that we can positively say about God, and things we have to say, well, not really, he's on this, he's in that, he's, anti that, whatever. It's a very, very thorough and yet also succinct, frankly, exploration of all of that stuff. So, for instance, there's one point where he quotes, I think it's Maximus the Confessor, and he says that anything we could say about God's, maybe, I don't know if it was attributes, but he says that this is what we can say that's around God. That God is eternal is a thing that we say that's around God, because you can't actually say what he is or who he is or how he lives or anything like that. And what's also kind of really beautiful about a lot of those passages in the beginning of that text, I'm actually using, are there any homeschoolers in the room? Yeah. I'm using this for homeschooling with my 2 teenage boys. They have to read 3 chapters a week, which there are moments of gnashing of teeth, but I do recommend it
all back around to the outer darkness.
That's right, exactly. I do recommend the newish translation published by St. Vlad's Seminary, which is good. It's good, clear, and it has the Greek on the facing page, so that's nice if you want to read the Greek. What he often does is he will go in very thorough detail about how we can and cannot talk about God and what that really means about who he is. And then often at the end of a paragraph, he may say something like, there's a whole chapter, for instance, on what do we do about all this sort of language of corporeality regarding God in the Bible, right? That he has eyes, hands, ears, and stuff. And actually, I was very happy when rereading that recently to learn that basically he says exactly what we said in some of our God's Body episodes. That was kind of nice. So we happen to be reading the Church Fathers and saying what they say. How about that?
And what an incredible happenstance since we make all this up.
Amazing, I know. It's just coincidence. But then he says, so we have to understand all this language is symbolic in one way or another. And then at the end he says, unless we're speaking about the incarnate Word, our Lord Jesus Christ, who had, this and this and this and this and this and this. And it's great. I love John of Damascus. He leaves nothing out. That's a very long answer, but this is a sticky wicket, as our friends across the pond would say, that you're talking about. But I think the cure really is humility. To kind of back away from the things that we think we know about God and so forth. So yeah, thank you very much. All right. Over on if you want to ask a question, you have to get in line. Over on this side. Oh, did you have a follow-up?
I had a follow-up.
You have to get in line. It's all good.
Jawohl, mein Herr.
I know. Well, all these people have been standing in line. Look at them. So over here, what's your questions? Or where are you from, and what's your name?
I'm John from Seattle, St. Name John.
All right. John from
My
Seattle.
rental car has a Washington plate. So there we go. I don't know how it got to Pittsburgh, but there it is.
I'd like you collectively to untangle a paradox that I've got about how on one hand God isn't subject to necessity, and on the other hand, well, Jesus had to die so he could hello Hades. Little miniature context, I grew up evangelical, and then spent a few decades in the non-denom emergent world. So because of that early upbringing, I grew up taking PSA for granted. And then in the non-denom emergent world, there was a lot of PSA is wrong, but it wasn't answered or filled with anything. It was just make sure you know that it's wrong. I said, okay, I got that. But growing up, it made internal coherent sense. Like it was a well-sealed, logically contained thing that I could hold on to, and now I had nothing to hold on to. I've been Orthodox for 3 years, and I feel like now I'm still being told, hey, PSA is wrong, and thank you for the whole Council of God episodes, which in this Old Testament run has been illuminating about how this should, it's obviously not sacrificial, it's great. But I'm still left with this paradox of, in Orthodoxy, the answer seems to be to why did he have to die? It's so he could go to Hades and conquer death by death. But that seems to run around of he's not subject to necessity. So what do I do?
Yeah. The thought that occurs to me, I don't know that this is going to be the most satisfying one, but the thought that occurs to me is, reality as we know it is created by God, right? He made this world. He made the heavens, the earth, the underworld, right? He made all of this. Certainly also he made a lot of these beings with free will. So that's why not everything is great. But to me, it's like saying, it's like suggesting that a fairy tale that begins with once upon a time is subject to the necessity of beginning with once upon a time. Why does it begin that way? Because that's how fairy tales begin. Now this might seem just sort of tautological, but the story of how God rescues us from the power of the death god is not a story where he's forced into something. So when we use language, say, well, he had to die to enter Hades, it's really actually just redundant. Entering Hades is dying. Right? Now, for those who were in first century Palestine watching it happen, they watched a human being die on the cross. That's what they saw happen, right? But there's a larger cosmic story going on, just as there is for any human being who dies. It's not just this material bit shutting down or moving into decay mode or whatever. There's a lot more going on. So even though we use language like, well, this has to be this way or whatever, like John Damascus would remind us, now when we say has to be, we don't really mean it in the sense of being subject to necessity. Now that's not just to take the, sometimes Calvinist cop out of say, well, in such a way as, so many of them do, they're like, well, God creates evil, but in such a way as he's not the author of evil, which doesn't make any sense. But I think that it's really comes down to, this is the way that the story is told. We don't actually know what the experience is of the Son of God entering into Hades. We use this language of him going to a place, and that place is the underworld. But even human beings who their souls go to the underworld, it's not like there's some kind of, cave, or I like to think of it as like a gray bureaucratic office, down underneath, that they're traveling to. But that is the language that we have. And even St. Paul mentions, as we said earlier, this language of Christ descending into the depths of the earth. He doesn't mean that Jesus started to drill down, and is burrowing, right? That's not what's going on there. But it's using this kind of, this mythic language to tell the story in that particular way. And so, the addition of death to the human body, which is done in Genesis, Christ voluntarily subjects himself to that. He lays his life down of his own accord. No one takes it from him. It's not necessity. No one kills Jesus. He bows his head and then gives up his spirit. Right? It's not that someone stabbed him or shot him or anything like that. So it's all voluntary. It is paradoxical, right? Because you could like, if you want to be very cynical about it, you could say, well, he set up this whole system of death, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, he wrote this story, and so now this is what has to happen, whatever. But I don't think that that's the right way to understand how the story goes. Because fundamentally what we have is a story. And that doesn't mean it's not real. I have people tell me sometimes when I describe Christianity as being mythic, they'll say, so you don't think it really happened? Like, no, it happened, but the way in which it happened, this is the way we understand what happened. It's in these mythic terms. So, yeah, Christ is definitely not subject to necessity, and even if we use language that sounds like that, there's so much other language that explicitly denies that. That means that we can't read it as being about necessity. We don't have permission to read it that way because he himself said it's voluntary. It's voluntary. So that's what I would say to that.
So
I love this. I can just gesture at you. I don't have to actually
yes.
because you guys don't know this maybe, but when we actually record the show for regular, we don't see each other.
Yeah.
So that's why I say, Father Stephen,
Yeah.
because he has
He's got to wake me up after.
And sometimes
giving his
you
part
or
of the
I will
answer.
just pause in the middle of saying something, but not actually be done. So that's why we now I can just kind of go.
Over to you.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
Yeah, so part of the necessity thing is actually historical Plato brain.
Ooh. Dun, 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 dun.
But we've got to go back to the 11th century. This was part of a big 11th century debate, which is really late for me. But
yeah, you usually don't care about anything that happens after about 400.
yeah, the book I'm working on writing right now, and this is news to ancient faith people in the back probably, but not to my Twitch stream. Interestingly enough,
we will consider this manuscript.
Not the next book I have coming out, but the book I'm writing right now to potentially come out, I don't know, sometime next year or something, is on atonement. And
I knew about this one actually.
this is going to be kind of a fat one because I'm going through everything, like historically, like as many as they'll let me put. So I've had to revisit the 11th century. So in the 11th century, this argument breaks out, and Anselm was involved in it. Because in Plato, you especially see this if you ever read the Timaeus. And I'm the weirdo who did a Greek independence study in undergrad. And part of it was I was going to do a translation of the Timaeus. And at one point in the semester, I was just beating my head against the wall trying to translate this section until I finally gave up and went and looked it up. And there was a note that said, this section of the text is hopelessly corrupt. And I was like, oh, thank you. But in the Timaeus, so you may know that for Plato, he does the creation of the world in the Timaeus. And there's this thing, the demiurge, that actually creates everything. Because again, his sort of the good for Plato can't be directly involved. And so there's this demiurge thing, and it looks at the good. So it kind of looks at what's good, and then it kind of sticks its hands into the material world that's not so good and shapes things after those patterns, right? And as it's doing that, Plato has these categories where it's either by necessity, which is anarchy in Greek, or by chance. Okay? So there are some things that sort of have to be for Plato, and then other things that could be otherwise. So if you're working with those categories, as somebody like Anselm was, philosophically, and you look at the death of Christ, you don't want to say that's by chance. right? That the way that all happened was by chance. You want to say, well, obviously, for all, this had to be necessary. It had to be necessary that Christ did it in exactly this way. And that's sort of the launching off point for Cur Deus Homo, right? Which is his work on atonement, translates, why the God-man? And that's really the question he's asking. Why did it have to be this way, right? That, as you point out, runs right up against the idea of God's freedom. Okay, Plato didn't have that problem because his God wasn't free. Right? His God didn't move or do anything. Right? But the Christian God obviously is free, right? And so those butt up against each other. And what comes out of that debate in the West is the idea of consequent necessity. This is one of those great, make a distinction things, right? So it wasn't strictly speaking necessary. But God decided to do it this way, and once he decided to do it this way, then it became necessary by virtue of him having made the decision. Right? So that kind of allowed them to work around the category and try to maintain both. Now, in the East, and people don't realize how much communication there actually was going on at that time, partly because it was mostly one way. Because almost nobody in Western Europe could read Greek. But anybody educated in the Byzantine Empire could read Latin. Right? And so things tend to go one way. So at the time, for example, Thomas Aquinas was writing, we have comments on his work from like the Patriarch of Constantinople at the time, right? And stuff, right? So there was more of that than you think. And the language that the East chose to use instead, they sort of necessity, they used the language of it being fitting, right? Or another way of saying fitting would be, it is meet and right, to coin a phrase, right? That it's kind of appropriate, that this is the way God chose to do it. Right? There are certainly, because he is free, other ways he could have chosen to do it. But this way is particularly appropriate. And so when you approach it from that angle, then when they talk about it, it's not, why did he have to do it this way? It's, why was this appropriate? And so you get meditations on Christ as the second Adam. Right? You get meditations on Jonah. You get meditations on, right? These other, about the movement, and say, so that we could look at it and marvel and say, this is wonderful and beautiful and fitting that God chose to accomplish our redemption this way without making any claim as to whether he could have come up with something else. Right? Does that help?
Very much so.
Yeah.
All righty.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to take a short break. But what I want all of you people who are in line to do...
Have we got a commercial to play?
It will... Man, I even did a commercial last time. Anyone remember that? I did a commercial last time. Yeah. It'll get patched in. When
I mean, I could do one.
Oh, absolutely, dude.
Would you like a commercial?
Go for it. Do it.
John Cucuzzelli's Institute of Liturgical Arts.
Well, see, he has to pay for that one.
Yeah. I do free commercials now and then, like
That's
for
true.
Rootless Coffee in Flint, Michigan.
That's true. That's right. That's
Best coffee ever, and they can't make it themselves because there's no good water in Flint, Michigan.
Oh.
Imagine that, making the most beautiful coffee roasts ever, and you can't drink them yourself. Wow. Rootless Coffee.
That's very dark. All right. So with that, wow. Where do we go from there? With that said, I want everyone who's in line right now, remember your position in line and who's in front of you, who's behind you. There's actually more people in this line than there are in this line. So the person at the end of this line, maybe you want to switch lines. I'm not going to say it guarantees that you'll be listened to. You know, we'll get all the way to the end of that line, but at least there's a slightly shorter line. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be right back with this episode of the Lord of Spirits
10
podcast. and sisters, giant killers, dragon slayers, serpent stompers, scorpion squishers. I should have brought with me, actually, I'm sure I've mentioned before on the podcast that Armenian priests, Armenian Apostolic Church priests, that they wear these special slippers. Anyone seen these? Special slippers that have liturgical slippers that have a scorpion in one heel and a serpent in the other. And so while they're celebrating the liturgy, they are literally stomping on scorpions and serpents. And I saw a picture of this. I thought it was so great. I loved it so much. And I mentioned this a number of times on the on various places anyway. And anyways, I was giving a talk earlier this year in Dallas. For some reason, I went to 3 times this year. Deacon Seraph is not here, is not to make a snotty remark. Here he comes in. Yeah. I was just mentioning that I went to Dallas 3 times this year. And the first time I met an Armenian priest. And I said to him, Father, I just have to say, I love y'all's shoes. He's like, what? And I said, the slippers you wear when you're, he's like, oh. I said, that is the most metal thing ever. And I said, where do you get those? He's like, let me look into this for you, whatever. And then I didn't think much about it. And then it wasn't the next visit, but maybe the 3rd visit. He wasn't there, but I gave a talk at another church, and this young Armenian woman came up to me and handed me this bag. And I open it up, and inside of this beautiful purple pair of slippers with gold embroidered scorpion and serpent in each of the heels. And he wrote me a note saying, I'm not sure if this is your size. And I'm like, my size? I'm not going to wear these. I'm going to show them to everybody. So yes, I love that. And actually, if you ever come visit me at my studio, they are on display right next to the front door. So you can see my Armenian, scorpion serpent stompers.
You can also get them from the System of a Down merch shop.
Oh, yeah. This is my opportunity, though, to tell my Armenian joke. Any Armenians in the room? No Armenians in the room. This is sad.
Don't you have to put a bag on your head if you're going to be an Armenian comedian?
Wow.
Gong Show reference. People.
Oh, yes. Wow.
Gong Show.
But so anyway, so one time I passed by, so there's the people who belong to the Armenian Apostolic Church, but there are Armenian Protestants. And I was driving through Manhattan, which is always an exciting experience, and I drove by this Armenian Protestant church. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, I've heard of this. I knew it existed, but I didn't think I'd actually see one. It was so kind of haphazard. And then it occurred to me, I was like, wow, Manhattan, this is an area with a lot of investors, a lot of very, very wealthy people. And so it's entirely possible that if you were to walk into that church on a Sunday morning, you could meet an Armenian in Armani. Thank you very much. And I had told that joke on the internet and was contacted by an Armenian who said, Armani was an Armenian. And that's actually where the name comes from. And it's just an Italianate version of the name of Armenian. So everything works together. So we're back. It's the second half of the Lord of Spirits podcast.
Definitely a dad.
Yes, I make no apologies about making dad jokes. I have 4 children, 3 of whom are sons, so they deserve it.
And 3 of whom he likes. Just to sow discord in your whole family.
Which 3 of my children do I actually like?
What's funny is they won't argue about it. They'll think they know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we're back. It's the second half of this episode of Lord of Spirits podcast, right here live at the Lord of Spirits conference. So that was the appropriate amount of woo. It's very good. I'm very proud of you.
They've stepped up their game.
That's right. The woos have it. So we're back here on the right. So go ahead, say your name and where you're from.
Yes, but we don't want too much woo, as Jonathan Badger would say.
No, we like woo on the Lord of Spirits podcast.
Hi, my first name is Kendall Stauffer. My name, as of joining the Orthodox Church last December, is David Kendall Stauffer.
Yeah, so much learning and laughter. I'm trying to remember my question. I'm going to start simple and expound until you stop me. Is life a game? What I mean is, the best way I can describe this is I didn't understand the harrowing of hell very well. I don't understand it perfectly, but I understood it better once I thought about it being a trick or a game that Jesus played on Satan. Like, there's the garden, there's God and Adam and Eve, and he's leading them towards life, and then Satan tricks them into making a wrong move that gets them kicked out, so on and so forth. And then the incarnation happens, and then Jesus, there's the phrase, hell took a body and met God, and the idea of that being like...
Surprise!
Yeah, right, yeah. The idea of that in the context of, like, especially when I think about people saying life is unfair, or that, as if the following the rules is the point of the game, whereas from what I understand about God's intention for creation is to experience relationship with us, which is the purpose of any game anyway. Do you know what I mean?
I don't think I totally know what you mean. However, I will say, so there is a lot of language in the Orthodox tradition about the idea of the incarnation, and particularly the suffering and death of Christ being a trick that God is playing on the devil. And a lot of the hymns of the church actually make reference to a fish hook. And so the devil is kind of depicted as a fish swallowing this hook. Shades of Jonah, anyone? And yeah, I'll be talking about that a little bit more on Saturday. But anyway, I think it's, there's also this language of that the heavenly powers even not really knowing exactly what Jesus was about, right? And sometimes I know people will say, oh, well, they'll talk about the demonic powers not knowing who he is. That's, when someone says that betrays that they never really read the Gospels closely, because how many times do these demons speaking out of people, call him Son of the Most High and this kind of thing? Like they know, yeah, they know who he is. But what they don't know is what he's doing there, right? They don't have a clear sense of that at all. And so yeah, it's just another image about the defeat of the devil. And this language is used, for instance, we mentioned earlier the Gospel of Nicodemus. This language is used there in the Gospel of Nicodemus. And the way that it plays out in that case is, so Hades and the devil are two separate entities in this version of the story. And the devil is saying to Hades, look, you're going to swallow Jesus and it's going to be the best thing ever. I've been having big problems with this guy and I'm going to bring him down here. And Hades is like, is this the guy that like last week, just his voice caused me to have to vomit up Lazarus, and he didn't actually have to pray or anything. He could just say, come forth. And the devil's like, yeah, it's that guy. And Hades is like, I don't think this is a good idea. And the devil's like, no, it's going to be fine. I've got him where I want him. And then when he shows up, he basically flattens him. And so it's really is this idea of this kind of trickery, that they don't know what hit them, right? Jesus's mission is very aggressive towards the demonic powers. He's casting them out all the time. There's exorcisms going on all the time, and it's definitely not. They definitely don't expect it. Like for instance, when he talks to the demons in Legion, they say, "Have you come to torment us before the time? Like, what are you doing here?" The answer, of course, is, "Guess what, guys? It's time. Your time has come." So it's not a game in the sense of like a game of chess or the royal game of Ur, which everyone should have signed up for by this point in the, to hopefully play. We have 32 players. Sorry, I couldn't help myself, little commercial there. But, well, Ellie made me do it. She just looked at me like, what? But yeah, so it's not that kind of game. Right? But it is this sense of trickery. Trickery is a big theme in the Bible. Like Jacob, of course, tricks his brother, tricks his father and his brother, actually. And there's often this sense that trickery is the thing that's necessary to get justice to happen. So that is there. But again, it's an image that's used to help us try to understand realities that we really cannot grasp. So what do you think, Abuna?
All wrong.
Oh, thanks. Oh, wow, there was disappointment in your voices. Thank you so much.
Well, any analogy, right? If you push it too far, it breaks down, right? So that's every single analogy. To quote Thomas Aquinas, an analogy is a comparison in one respect only, not in all respects, right?
Oh, good. You said something positive about Thomas Aquinas.
I mean, sort of. I just quoted him.
Yeah.
For what it's worth. Yeah, I think it's important, dovetailing with what Father Andrew said, it's important to remember that for ancient cultures, including ancient Judaism, deceit and treachery, and deceit in terms of deception and treachery were not innately evil or sinful. Why would they be? No,
I mean, the classic example is...
It was about, there's tons of examples in the Old Testament.
But a really obvious one from our own time, for instance, would be, you're living in Nazi Germany.
Oh, here we go. I thought we'd agree to stop with the Hitler and use Pol Pot or somebody.
Whatever.
You're in Cambodia and Pol Pot shows up at your door.
Someone comes to your door and says, "Where are the people that I want to kill?" And you say, "They're not here," even though they are here. Is that a good lie? Absolutely. You're saving someone's life.
You're doing the right thing
by telling that lie.
But
you can't say, "Oh, I cannot tell a lie." Take them. I'm sorry.
For them, it was about motive. It's what you're doing, right? So if you're a grifter and you're deceiving and tricking people to enrich yourself at their expense, right, or to take advantage of people, or to, right, then that is a sin, right? But if you're using deception or trickery as tools to accomplish some good end or some just end, like Jacob, Tamar, David several times, right? Like on and on and on, right? Then that's not seen as a bad thing. This whole idea that having a word come out of your mouth that isn't absolutely truthful, right, accurate to reality, is by nature wrong, comes from an 18th century German named Immanuel Kant.
Hey, Immanuel Kant was a real... Probably not sing that song.
And they make all the jokes about how I can't even and all that stuff. Yeah. And Kant had a very powerful argument for this. Are you ready? What if everyone always lied all the time? Society couldn't function.
True.
Yes, that is a true statement, but again, it has nothing to do with particulars, right? Kant's categorical imperative. He could only come up with like one or two categorical imperatives, because everything else he tried to do that with in morality, like, there were obvious exceptions. Where you would have to say, well, okay, that rule doesn't apply here, right? And he was trying really hard, right, to make this system work. So yeah, and we've inherited a lot of that. The other piece of it is, another way people get to it at least, is another fella from around the same era, and that's Thomas Hobbes. Boo him too. That's the only Calvin and Hobbes you should have anything to do with. So Thomas Hobbes, when he's talking about ethics, said there are two springs of human action: self-interest and the interest of others. And so anything you do that benefits you is innately bad or tainted. And so for an action to be moral, it has to be purely motivated by other people. And you can see how a lot of people have internalized that. Right?
Mixed motives.
Oh, you're only doing that to make money. And it's like, well, yes, that's how I pay my mortgage and or rent, or right. Like, somehow that makes it bad or taints
You're feeding the homeless because it makes you feel
your
good.
thing. So for the church fathers, being in Greek and Roman culture, right, the idea that Christ would trick the devil was not problematic, right, because of what he brought about through that kind of trickery and deception. But if we've got Kant or Hobbes going on in the back of our brains, right, like that causes us this issue, right?
Last comment, you can answer yes or no. Is this what's happening in the parable of the, what is it, the shrewd servant, that like the one who like essentially steals money from his master?
Yes. He knows he's getting fired, so he basically cancels the debt of a whole bunch of his master's debtors. So that once he's fired, right, he will like have a golden parachute, right? He'll have these other people who are grateful to him.
Yep.
Right? And Christ says, look, you know, these wicked people, they can figure this out. Why can't you figure this out? Right?
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, back over to this side.
I'm Ephraim from Emmaus, Pennsylvania.
Hey! That was not very enthusiastic. Yay for Emmaus.
Well, you're fleeing the place, so I mean,
Well,
what?
not tomorrow. I love Emmaus. All right.
So if you serve food to a spirit, such that the spirit is going to eat the food, and then you consume the food with the spirit, that's pagan and bad, right? So,
Go out on a limb and say yes.
therefore, how bad is it for Christians to pour out a drink on somebody's grave?
Or just the asphalt for your dead homies.
That's right. Yeah. You know, I think, yeah, I feel like we've gotten this one before, or at least it's been addressed before. Maybe it's just in the group. I don't know. I think, number one, number one, I don't do that. Like, why would you do that? But anyway.
It's a waste of alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does look like a libation offering, you know. But I would say also that, like, there is no if a person is just pouring that out in the grave of their dead loved one or whatever, without sort of the ritual package that goes with that traditionally in paganism, is there understanding that they are in some way feeding that spirit? Probably not. It is a like this links me to you kind of thing, but I don't think there's not usually the sense of I'm feeding you, right? It's not the way that idolatry works. It is definitely adjacent on some level, for sure. The action is similar, but it's very reduced. You know,
It's just low-grade ancestor worship.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
Who doesn't dabble in a little bit of that, right?
You know,
Like,
but or just sort of ancestor veneration on some level. You know, that's the problem. Is like when you've got something that looks like or just partakes in one or two elements of something that used to be a much larger system, right? It's hard to analyze exactly what is the intention, what's going on there. Are there ritual prayers that are being said, you know, as part of that? Probably not, you know, probably not. And then on top of that, you actually have the very traditional Christian practice of eating meals in cemeteries as a way of commemorating the dead. This is definitely a thing, but you're not feeding your relatives by doing that. You know, just as when you get Koliva blessed and then you eat it as part of a memorial, you're not feeding a god, feeding a spirit, you know, but there is an eating that goes along with that on the part of the people who are there. I mean, that's what I would say. It's I don't know, it's a gray-ish area in my opinion, but it's so reduced, it's so hard to know like what exactly is supposed to be going on.
I think it's just one dimension of the Irish problem, and it's about time our government did something about it. I'm just going old school racist now.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
early 19th century.
Wow. Wow. That's 3 wows.
Yeah. They're waiting for me to say I'm joking. And I'm just letting it hang there. Just letting it.
Dutch Irish cattiness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, most of the racist things I ever heard my dad say were about other white people.
There you go.
It's true, isn't it?
Wow, the awkward nodding by the family out back there in the corner. Wow.
They're not happy to affirm that, but they feel forced by Kant's categorical imperative.
The dead hand of Immanuel Kant.
No, I mean, I wouldn't do it,
Yeah.
but, you know.
Yeah. All right. Wow, that might be the shortest. Yeah, okay. All right.
No, I didn't say anything about that.
Yeah. Okay, over here on this side.
Hey, I'm Matthew from Raleigh, North Carolina.
All right, my future location there. Yes.
So I have a question about saints' relics. So I know that as Orthodox, we don't practice cremation because it does harm to the body, it is disrespectful to the human person, and we are anticipating resurrection. Given that, I struggle a little bit with understanding pieces of saints being spread around, because in order to get a piece of a saint, it feels like it would require, unless it's just natural decomposition, doing violence to the body of a holy person, and it also feels like it would require, or just kind of the disintegration of that by literal disintegration, right? Taking that apart. I would love to get better understanding of that. Maybe there's some context I'm missing, and be enlightened on why having pieces of saints around is not showing disrespect to the body of that holy person.
All right, well, it's Kant's categorical imperative has come back. Here's why I think that. Because it is a very different thing to incinerate and smash with a grinder for the purposes of, frankly, reducing a person to a much smaller space and, make it easier to dispose of their remains or whatever. It is a very different thing than it is to very carefully, very painstakingly, with a lot of prayer, remove a piece of bone from another piece of bone, enshrining it in a beautiful golden reliquary for the veneration of the faithful. These are two very different actions. I have taken the second action. In the building where I currently podcast from, not this moment, but that I normally podcast from, they actually did the first action down in the basement. So it was actually a funeral home and crematorium, which is why I often say that I am perched above a disused gateway to the underworld, because I literally mean that. So I mean, preparing relics, which is something that I've had the blessing of doing actually a bunch of times now. It is a very, very careful and painstaking process that it's done with a lot of respect and a lot of love and a lot of honor. It's something that, like, when I do it, because no one's given me like a whole saint's body to deal with, so I'm dealing with, smaller relics. I place it on the altar in the church, and I'm wearing vestments. And I have tools that I use only for that purpose, right? That's very, very different than, is this your most modestly priced receptacle? Checking to see who's watched a certain Coen Brothers film. It's interesting, actually, in the film that the guy that they cremate has a Greek name. What's that all about? But yeah, so if you say it is bad to take a body apart, categorically true, then you have a problem, because we see, the practice of distributing relics for veneration comes because there are, number one, when the body is completely decayed, there are multiple bones, and so the bones would get distributed, and then sometimes they would get subdivided, right? So yeah, this is a very natural thing to do. Another good example, of course, is the true cross, right? Where there's this, actually, was it Calvin who claimed, that there's enough pieces of the true cross out there you could build 3 Noah's Arks? Was that him?
Well, Calvin, one of the most entertaining, the most entertaining thing he ever wrote, by a lot, was he did a catalog of all the relics in Western Europe in the 16th century. And so it's a lot of, did St. John the Forerunner have 4 legs and 3 arms?
Yeah. So what's funny is
that kind of thing.
There is, and you can still hear that claim repeated. There's so many pieces, claim pieces of the cross out there. You could build 3 Noah's Arks. And so actually, I can't remember who it was now that did this, but someone decided to do the best possible estimate that they could of the volume of all claimed relics of the true cross without any kind of question of authentication, and then compared that against the estimated volume of a first century Roman cross. And you know what they came up with? That about 1/10 of the true cross is probably still around.
If they're all legit.
If they're all legit. So it is, that claim is a complete joke for one thing. But if you have pieces of the true cross, of course it's wood, so it's coming apart. Why wouldn't you have a piece here and a piece here? And actually, it just so happens that I brought a hand blessing cross with me that has a piece of the true cross that everyone's going to get to venerate on Saturday night. So yes, I mean, once you understand the resurrection, once you understand the power of God working through the relics of the saints, it makes complete sense that you would want to distribute that for the veneration of the faithful, for their, in many cases, healing. And we say this, of course, in the shadow of one of the great saints of America. Literally just on the other side of some of those walls are the relics of St. Raphael of Brooklyn, which I can attest, by the way, that when those relics were lifted up out of the ground here at the Antiochian Village a little over a year ago, there was suddenly a sweet smell that the hundreds of people who were standing there all smelled for about 10, 15 minutes. And so, and the purpose of our bringing them out of the ground was so that they might be distributed and venerated and so forth. And it was clear that he himself, through the blessing of God, showed up to let us know that what we were doing was totally cool. Really. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. Anything to add?
Yeah. Well, you got to remember also cremation was a pagan practice.
That
was an actual pagan practice. So the church's historical condemnation of cremation was a condemnation of the pagan practice, not this modern way of disposing of the dead. It still applies.
Which is worse.
Right? But there's the
modern way is worse.
So
look it up. Look up
that.
the real process sometime and see how horrifyingly bad it is.
Yeah. The other, you also have to remember with saints, it's a fraction of saints who are incorrupt. Right. So it's not that we have this wholly formed incorrupt body and we're, the Crusaders did some of that, but that's not the common.
Mostly it's bones.
Practice. And then third, I can't believe I have to defend John Calvin.
I'm so sorry.
But no, it's his fault. But part of the Counter-Reformation, that was one of the points that Rome kind of took as yeah, this is kind of true. And in the Counter-Reformation, they cracked down on selling relics in general. So now the current policy Rome has is if a relic has ever been sold for money, it is invalid. Period. Doesn't matter what kind of chain of evidence you have. So they really cracked down on that. And so that invalidated a lot of the fakes that Calvin was pointing to. But a lot of that was like folks grifting Crusaders, right? Like, hey, you want a piece of the true cross to bring home with you? They have some driftwood they found on the way to the stall that day,
Yeah. All right, thank you. Okay, over here.
Good evening, Fathers. Philip from Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
All right, North Central.
That's right.
Fracking country.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I was raised in the Old Dominion, another Commonwealth, so high glory.
The land of my birth. I was born down there. I was born in Newport News.
Okay, I grew up in Virginia Beach.
All right.
Just across the way.
Hey, neighbor.
Get a room.
You were fist pumping for Grand Rapids earlier, so come on. Right.
No, they were fist pumping.
Oh, okay.
Rapids. I just brought it up.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So my question has to do with something you touched on in one of your earlier podcasts about the impact of filioque on the understanding and the expression of the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. I was hoping you could expand on that maybe broadly. I'm interested in the impact that the development of filioque, in particularly the Latin Catholic tradition and the traditions that came out of it, how did it impact not just the doctrinal theological experience of this understanding, but how did it impact the way people lived? How did it impact their practice of the faith? How did it impact the way in which those traditions developed? And then the second part of my question is, was there any impact on the East, kind of in reaction to that, in response to it?
Wow, this is like bigger than a dissertation kind of question. This is a multi-volume magnum opus. I mean, there's things that I could say. I don't know. Do you have something about this in particular on your mind?
About how the Filioque became the source of all heresies.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Oh, you're just going to channel Father John Romanides now? All right,
It's not the source of all heresies,
Yeah.
by the way. At least 3 came from Joseph Smith, for example.
Junior. Wow.
So
We do have at least one former Mormon in the room, actually.
So the core issue with the Filioque is that it fundamentally misunderstands the doctrine of the Trinity. And so the biggest effect it has had in the West is that almost nobody in the West understands the doctrine of the Trinity anymore. And you can test this very easily. Walk into any Protestant or Roman Catholic church and ask them to explain the Trinity. Ask the pastor. Ask the priest. Right? Because the structure of the Trinity, as it existed, as laid out by the First and Second Ecumenical Councils, is that, as we say in the Nicene Creed, there's one God, the Father. One God, namely the Father. Right? That's in the Bible. St. John's Gospel, Christ said that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. Okay? God the Father is the only one referred to as O Theos in the Greek, where the article is put in front of God. Okay? God is predicated of the Son and of the Spirit. Okay? And that's because we believe in what's called the monarchy, the monarchia in Greek, of the Father. There's one archi, the Father, from whom the Son is generated, is begotten, and from whom the Spirit proceeds, which is also in St. John's Gospel, right? Just directly quoted from it, okay? And so then you read St. Gregory of Nyssa's Why There Are Not Three Gods, right? You read St. Basil the Great on this. St. Basil the Great, in talking about the Trinity, this is where he lays out the principle that we've talked about on the show before, that the worship given to the image passes to the prototype, right? Meaning the Son and the Spirit as the direct image of the Father, the precise image of the Father. When they are worshipped, that worship passes to the Father. St. Gregory of Nyssa uses that argument to say this is why there are not three gods. There is one worship. Okay. So, Father, Son, begotten, the source of all things. The early church fathers never used the term monotheist to describe themselves, which is important because monos and theos are both Greek words. And they call pagans polytheists all the time. But they never call themselves monotheists. They call themselves effectively monarchists. They believe in the monarchia of the Father. There's one first principle, the Father. Okay? So, in trying to respond to Arians, the church in Spain first, where there were a lot of Arians, right? Because the Goths, right, the Visigoths in particular in Spain, converted to Arianism. One of the arguments the Arians would use was they would say, well, you say God the Father begets the Son and the Spirit proceeds, right? So they would say, well, that means God the Father is really God, right? And the Son is therefore somehow lesser because no persons come right from the Son. So what they're doing is they're taking part of the definition of the Father, not the definition of God, but the definition of the person of the Father, and they're applying that to the definition of God. That's the sort of ledger domain they're using. But rather than pointing that out, as for example St. Photius the Great would, in Spain they just make this argument, well, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. See, so a person does proceed from the Son. So checkmate, Arians, right? St. Photius the Great also points out that this just begs a bunch of questions, even though that's not correct. That's not what begging the question is a logical fallacy. But it incites a number of other questions like, well, okay, now no one proceeds from the Holy Spirit. So is the Holy Spirit not God? Or do we have to have a fourth person now who proceeds from the Spirit? How long do we keep this going? Right? This is literally the argument St. Photius makes. So it's wrong-headed for all of these reasons. And Roman Catholicism, for example, is aware of this. If you read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, they say, this is one of those weasel words like Father Andrew was talking about, we affirm the filioque in a way that does not deny the monarchy of the Father. Three card money, right? Like, so they're aware of the problem, okay? But now we have to take another piece. I'm going to get to the practical stuff here in a minute, okay? Because we need a second piece, and that's St. Augustine's De Trinitate. And St. Augustine is a saint and a father of the church, according to the Fourth Ecumenical Council, okay? That doesn't mean he was right at fifth. That doesn't mean he was right about everything, okay? That doesn't mean he never made an error. And in fact, St. Augustine, at the end of his life, disavowed the his De Trinitate, his work on the Trinity. He refused to have any more copies made when people asked him for it, because he said it wasn't worth reading. Okay? And if you actually read it, in the introduction, he says, it probably would have been better if I had said nothing on this topic. But people asked me to say something, and so I tried to say something. Right? Okay? So I would not use this as the basis for my whole theology, personally. But in the West, nobody read any Greek. They only knew Latin, and he wrote it in Latin. Okay? And so all of the peculiarities of his view, right, regardless of how he felt about them later, came to characterize view of the Western tradition. And the problem with his De Trinitate, the biggest one, I mean, he affirms the filioque in it too, but the biggest problem with it is actually that he reduces the persons to relationships. Meaning, instead of having one God who is the Father, who generates the Son, from whom the Spirit proceeds, right? There's one God, which is sort of the whole thing, the divine essence. And then within the divine essence, there are these relationships of filiation and fatherhood and, right, and procession, right? So they're just sort of relationships that exist within the divine nature, which relativizes their personhood, right? Because in his mind, the Eastern view, I think, was a little too close to tritheism. Because remember, St. Augustine has a case of Plato brain, right, that he inherited. If we distinguish them too far apart, right, so he sort of muddies the distinctions, okay? So once you do that, right, you end up with, and this is the way a lot of people speak, both Roman Catholic and Protestant. They'll just talk about God. And it's not super clear. Are you talking about the Father? Are you talking about Christ? Are you talking about the Holy Spirit? When you just say God, who are you talking about? And I've had people who I asked, where I'd say, wait, which person of the Trinity are you talking about? I had this, I'm talking about God in his unity. Who dat, right? Is that like a fourth person? Right? I mean, Cornelius Van Til slags one of my own people, right, because he was Dutch, right, said, yeah, we have a real problem in Western theology because we have these three persons, but then we have this impersonal divine essence. What should we do about this? Oh, I know, the divine essence is a person too. It's like, wow, worst possible solution to our problem. Cool.
I mean, there's the Benny Hinn version, which is there's a trinity of trinities. So he actually has 9 persons.
Yeah. He's
Benny
just going
Hinn, who
straight
was
for
raised
Sephiroth.
Orthodox. Benny Hinn was raised Orthodox, by the way. What happened?
Here's what happened to Benny Hinn.
He went to Canada and became Pentecostal.
That's not it.
No, it's true.
He moved in with his cousin Larry. Wow, no one watched Perfect Strangers and realizes that Benny Hinn is Balky? Like, no one? Anyway, okay.
Actually, that guy lives, Bronson Pinchot lives in northeastern Pennsylvania now. Somewhere, like near Scranton.
Okay. I was not aware of that.
Yeah,
okay. So you've got this sort of God in his unity. And then still got Plato lingering around. You get this profound disconnect between God and the world. Okay? And so this is where the Protestants go after sainthood in the Roman Catholic Church. That's not where I go. This is where I go after created grace. So in the Roman Catholic world, in Roman Catholic theology, for example, an icon, right? They have icons, right? They use icons. They believe that an icon is sort of a container or a holder for a finite amount of grace. And you go and you venerate and you pray before that icon, and some quantity of that grace, because grace is kind of quantifiable, is transmitted to you. Or the relics of a saint, right? There's a certain amount of grace, right, from that saint's life. You go and you venerate it, some of that grace comes to you, right? And I was taught this by Roman Catholics. This isn't just me characterizing them like actual Cistercian monks, right, are the ones who told me that this is how it works. And so that means grace is not the activity of God. It's this sort of medicine, right, for the forgiveness of sins. It's sort of quantifiable. And you get this whole sort of spiritual economy by the time you get to the 16th century. And that's what the reformers were reacting to in large part. Because that's where things like indulgences come in, right? Here's some grace to forgive some sins, right? Right? All of that. That's what they're reacting to, right? And so in classical Protestantism, grace is just God's unmerited favor, which we would call something like his mercy or just blessings, right? But they're pushing back on the grace is a thing to grace is now kind of nothing, right? That's kind of nothing. And again, not the activity of God. So the very short version of that I could have just said was the filioque is part of a series of dominoes that fall that create this rift between God and creation. That then gets bridged, but not really by God himself, by things God sends, namely grace, right? And those graces are then mediated in different ways.
We'll be expecting your 3-volume work on the subject.
Yeah. What would you like to add to that, Father?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, it is 10:10 p.m. So we're going to take
10:10:1, 10:10:2.
Thank you.
There's an obscure reference.
We're going to take 2 more questions. One from here, one from here. So I'm very sorry for everybody else who's in line, but there will be more opportunities.
I may linger.
Oh yeah, you can linger, whatever. This
I
guy,
may linger.
He only sleeps 2 hours a night anyway. So
this guy goes at 3:30 in the afternoon, has a nice dinner at Bob Evans.
That's right, Bob Evans.
And then
I feel like you've made the Bob
sleep.
Evans reference before. But yeah, there will be more Q&A after our various talks, and of course you can catch us, in the halls and so forth. But yeah, we're going to take 2 more, and then everybody wake up early for 7 a.m. Orthos.
If I linger, you could ask your questions off the record.
There you go. That's
no
right.
one will know what
Say
we
very
talked about.
spicy things. But there's a lot of microphones around, Father Stephen. You never know what could happen.
It's not going to stop me. if I
Yeah,
stop
right,
them.
exactly. That's true. All right.
I'm Scott from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
There we go.
I closed a couple weeks ago and appreciated Dutch people, so I won't do that again. But being from Grand Rapids, things like the atonement and sacrifice come up quite a bit locally. So my question is, it's become, and you've spoken about this before, but maybe you could expand on it, and I'm very happy to hear you've got a book about atonement coming out, but maybe we'll get a little bit of a preview of that. Is the question of, does the sacrificial system in the Torah account for what we would call deliberate sins? Because it's become very common now, if not just now standard, even amongst like Jewish commentators like Milgram or Baruch Levine, that there is no mechanism, if you will, in the Torah for sins that I do deliberately.
Oh, man.
Within the sacrificial system. And you even have some Orthodox authors essentially relaying that as well. That this is a distinction between the Old and New Covenants. Is that in the Old Covenant, intentional sins, there is no forgiveness within the sacrificial system. It's a special gift from God. Versus in the New Covenant, that is now on the table. Okay. So I guess the question is, how is that maybe not accurate? And then, what do you think of a statement like the sacrificial system in the Torah, if it's a sin management system, that it fundamentally fails? And then, what does it look like then for this to overflow in the New Covenant? If it's not this wasn't on offer at all in the Old Covenant, but it is on offer now in the New Covenant. If it's not that, if it's a fulfillment of what was on offer in the Old Covenant, what does that look like now?
Wow. I mean, the first thing I've been hearing about this idea that the Old Covenant, it doesn't cover deliberate sins, and it just makes, like, a little part of me dies every time I hear that, because it's like, have you read Leviticus? Like, really, just read it, because there's all kinds of stuff in there. It's not like, whoops, accidentally I committed adultery. Whoops, I accidentally, like, there's all kinds of means for repentance that are given for things that there's no way you could do unintentionally. No way. Right?
Oops, I coveted your cow.
Right. It's just, it blows my mind, honestly, but I think really there's so much theology going on that is in profound ignorance of what it simply says in the text. I mean, another classic example is one you mentioned, atonement. Father Stephen likes to point out is, there is this very strong idea out there that, in the Old Covenant, sins were placed on an animal and then that animal was sacrificed. Literally, that never happens anywhere in the Old Testament. That's never commanded anywhere. Again, very boring book, Leviticus. But like, if you're going to make claims about, I mean, it's not my opinion it's boring. If you're going to make claims about how sacrifices work and what they're for, you should read that book very closely, because that's the book that really covers that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just, I'm sad to say it, because I criticize people who basically say, well, everyone who disagrees with me is either uninformed, stupid, or evil. But in this case, it's really uninformed. It really is uninformed, because it really just, read what it says about various kinds of sins and then what you do in order to deal with them. What can actually be done for repentance for them. It is there. If you just read it. It's not the most, I don't consider Leviticus boring, but it can be difficult to read because it's a whole lot of detail about stuff that often that people can kind of get lost in. It's more riveting than Numbers, for sure. Although Numbers has Although Numbers has the whole Korah story in it, which is just great. You know,
And
Korah
the
stories.
snake being lifted up in the wilderness.
Yeah, I know.
And
You know, but in between all that census data, you know,
what could be more exciting than census data?
almost anything. Incredulity is probably the first way I would respond to that.
Right. So here's where they're getting that. And then here's why their entire argument makes no sense whatsoever. So where they're getting that is they're looking at a couple of passages in Leviticus and Numbers that deal with the daily sin offering, the one that they just do every day. Right? So priests come, they offer a sin offering for themselves, and they offer one for the sins of the people. Right? And that was considered, right, as covering their sins and the involuntary / unknown sins of the people. Okay? If you committed a sin that you knew about, there are other procedures in the Torah for dealing with it. Right? Many of which include sacrifice. Right? But so that's what they're getting. They're reading those. Not that any scholar would ever just read a couple passages in isolation and make a broad conclusion from them and ignore everything else. But that's what they're doing. Right? And that's why we could point out all these examples. Like, oh, well, I stole from this guy involuntarily, so I have to pay back 5 times. But if I do it voluntarily, I don't have to bother to pay him back because I'm going to hell anyway, I guess. Right? Like, it just literally makes no sense. But here's the bigger reason their argument makes no sense. We have to kind of dissect what they're saying. So what they're saying is, number one, the sacrifices in the Old Testament took care of people's sins. What does that mean? Because when I read the Old Testament, especially when you get to the prophets, God's like, hey, you're not repentant. Stop with the sacrifices. I don't want them. Seems like the sacrifices don't do anything in and of themselves in the Old Testament. That's not a New Testament reading back. That's in the Old Testament itself. Right? The way sacrifices worked in the Old Testament with voluntary sin is that you repented, a la David, who did not accidentally murder a man after impregnating his wife accidentally. Right? That's
Oops.
right. You repent, right? You repent, and that repentance had a concrete structure of things you did. It wasn't just feeling bad, right? Like, if you stole, you paid back 5 times, right? You did all of these things. And then at the end of that process, you went and you offered sacrifices to God, which enacted the reconciliation between you and other people and you and God, which were the same thing. Okay? And then they're implying that something in the New Testament, and I'm not sure exactly what, because we're talking about Protestants, so they're not talking about like the Eucharist or sacraments or anything, or baptism, by and large, unless they're Lutherans maybe, right? Something in the New Testament now takes care of all those sins. Well, what does that mean? You don't have to repent in the New Testament? You could just do whatever you want, and it's all taken care of by something, by Christ 2,000 years ago, so now it doesn't matter what I do? And I never have to, right? Obviously, they don't think that. So the very argument falls apart, right? Whereas I would point out in the Orthodox Church, it works fundamentally the same way in the New Testament, right? I sin, I repent, I receive forgiveness from God. It culminates in the celebration of the Eucharist. That's why if there's still repenting that needs to be done, we restrict people from receiving the Eucharist until it's done. That's when you go and offer the sacrifice. Celebrate being reconciled with your brothers and sisters and with God, which are the same thing. Right? So I think there's a fundamental continuity there. Now, The fulfillment part is not that the Old Testament sin management system didn't work. It worked, but working means it accomplished its goal. What was its goal? To manage sin in a particular piece of land and real estate until the Messiah could come and deal with sin permanently. So I think St. Paul's argument about the sacrifices and about the Old Covenant in general is, no, it did what it was supposed to do, but it was never aimed at those other things. It was never aimed at giving people eternal life. It was never aimed at, right? It did what it was supposed to do in the time it was supposed to do it, right? Now we've received the fulfillment of it, right? And it's expanded beyond a little parcel of land, one people group, right?
All right, thank you. Now for our final question in this live Q&A episode here at the
Recorded live. This
Laura's,
episode exists in a liminal space.
It's true.
Between life and memory.
Because time and space don't exist,
Yeah.
right? So, but lunchtime anyway, doubly so. So yes, what's your question? What's your name? Where are you from? What's your question?
I'm Brian. I'm from Pittsburgh, and
A local boy.
yes.
Finally.
And, I am one of your Roman Catholic listeners.
Uh-oh.
So I don't know, maybe we can throw down about created grace later.
Yeah.
Honestly, I learned very little of it when I was once in seminary. So
Wow.
It's actually somewhat news to me. But anyway, my question has nothing to do with that. My question is, in the West, it's the Feast of the Guardian Angels today, and I was prompted to think about angelic guardians of creation, because I think I asked this question in the Facebook group once, and but I'd like to ask it here again, just because I'm still kind of wrestling with it. How does the conquest of the physical world work under Christ? Is it at the baptism, like the waters are purified, the whole earth is purified, all the demons that were being worshipped by the pagans in the springs and the hills and the mountains just kind of vanish and the angels take over? Or does it have to be that the church has to evangelize the people of a place first, and then, and like maybe use a concrete example of this, say if I'm whitewater rafting down on the Ligonier River down at Ohio State Park an hour south of here, am I praying to God to save me from the demon of the river, or am I praying to the guardian angel of the river? And maybe that's overthinking it. Maybe that's like a tongue-in-cheek example.
Yes.
But like, how does that work? How does the scattering of the demons that have power over creation work, sort of in real time?
Yeah. So
Please weigh in on the metaphysical status of the Allegheny River.
Right. I'm a Susquehanna guy. I don't know what to tell you. Right. So we see Jesus doing a lot of exorcisms, and yet somehow there are still demons around. Did he not finish the job? Well, I think the clue is the beginning of the book of Acts, right, where Jesus ascends into heaven, and St. Luke tells us, in the previous book I was writing, the Gospel according to St. Luke, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and to teach, meaning that the book of Acts, which is basically the first collection of Christian saints' lives, is about what Jesus continued to do and to teach. And so Christ is still doing all of that. And he's doing it through the church. He's doing it through the saints. And, this is part of the point of sending out the apostles and saying, now, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples, baptize all nations and so forth, that they are continuing the work that he himself has begun. And that now Christ rules, as it says in the scripture, in the midst of his enemies until they will all be put under his feet. That has not yet occurred. And the reason why we know that hasn't occurred yet is because demonic activity is still happening in the world, right? So, could God have simply snapped his fingers and made all the demons instantly disappear into the abyss and it would just be game over? Of course he could do that. But God's love for us is that we participate in his ministry. We participate in him by doing his works. This is what it means to be imagers of God. And so when we live the faithful Christian life, we are engaging in this exorcistic way of living that drives out demonic powers from us, from those around us, and invites the presence of God, the power of God, with us. So, I can't I can't tell you the specifics of what is going on with the Allegheny River, but
Take a stand, man.
yeah. But what I can say is that, misfortune and difficulty and suffering in the world is associated with demonic activity. That doesn't mean that there's some devil somewhere pressing a button and making the river do X, Y, and Z, right? But that, this is the origin of human suffering. And when we ask for God's help and talk to a guardian angel, whatever, I mean, it's not like we're saying, well, I'm not going to talk to God today. I'm just going to talk to my guardian angel. Like, look, I serve him. I'm on his team. Like, how would that even work? You can't say, well, I want to talk to you and not him. That's not a thing, right? So even if you do talk to a saint or an angel and ask for their help, you are asking for God's help and it may well be that God decides to send that angel or saint as the help that he's going to give you. Certainly the prayer tradition, the Orthodox Church, and certainly your own, Roman Catholic tradition, praying to God, praying to saints, by no means are these things mutually exclusive. This is all part of the whole community of as y'all like to call it, the Church Triumphant, right? So, it's not over. The enemy has been scattered, but like any army that's in retreat, it is sacking and burning and raping and pillaging as it goes. And so, what we're engaging in is the action to pursue, to hunt down the demonic powers and to destroy them and to cleanse the world and to continue the work that he himself didn't just begin, but now is continuing to do through us, right? So that's where we are in the timeline, is he rules in the midst of his enemies.
We also know things aren't all under his feet yet, because St. Paul explicitly says, now we do not yet see all things under his feet.
Oh, there you go. That's pretty straightforward.
But, he says, we see Christ risen above the powers and principalities right? So he's above them, right? But they're not yet completely subjugated to him, right? That is something that is happening, and as Father Andrew said, we share in that activity. And I will be bolder. Who's in charge of the Allegheny River depends on how close you are to January 6th. Because there are a lot of
January 6th.
There are a lot of Orthodox churches in Pittsburgh. It's got to be 2 or 3 priests out there blessing the Allegheny River.
At least.
So, if you're close, but then a lot of sinning goes on in and around the Allegheny River. So if you're, if it's December or something, you could be in trouble. So if you're going to go rafting, say in January, February, just to be safe.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you for coming live. If I happen to callously send you away while you were still waiting so fervently in line, we'd still like to hear from you. You can email us, send all the hate mail to lordofspirits@ancientfaith.com.
Get out your phone right now and email us.
That's right. You can message us at our Facebook page or leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/lordofspirits. And if you have basic questions about the Orthodox faith, or you need help to find a parish, go to orthodoxintro.org. We actually have one of our former orthodoxintro.org responding priest with us today. Who could it be? Not me.
Yeah, he couldn't take it anymore. And join us for our live broadcasts on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. I have it on good authority that rock and roll ain't noise pollution.
And if you are on Facebook, unlike Father Stephen, follow our page, join our discussion group, leave reviews and ratings in all the places. Join the tens of thousands who listen to this show and share it with another friend so we can add +1.
And finally, be sure to go to ancientfaith.com/support and help make sure we and lots of other AFR podcasters stay on the air. Rock and roll will never die.
Thank you, good night, and God bless you.
You've been listening to The Lord of Spirits with Orthodox Christian priests, Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung, a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio. And I beheld, and I heard the voice of many angels round about the throne, and the beasts, and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power, and riches, and wisdom, and strength, and honor, and glory, and blessing. Revelation chapter 5, verses 11 through 12.